Hello guys, welcome to Redditor's Revenge. Here we post amazing revenge stories daily. And if you want more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel and stay tuned with us. Moving to our today's first story, about the revenge OP took on his Shady boss as well as other higher authorities involved after they fired him unlawfully. Now story. I never thought of myself as capable of taking action based on hatred. But when I found myself unemployed for an unfair reason, I just let myself go and knew I had to do something, set the record straight, and send a message to avoid things like what happened to me from happening to other people. In January this year, I received news that my wife had stage I breast cancer. It was one of the most difficult moments in my life. Every thought that went through my head was solely devoted to thinking about my wife's health. I did everything I could to keep her happy and positive. When we got the diagnosis, I sent my boss a formal request to leave work a couple of hours early for the days when we needed to go to radiotherapy and be by my wife's side whenever she needed a checkup. I work as an accountant for a new beverage company that slowly has gained a spot in our national market. My job is to keep track of each ingredient's order and make sure it all comes together at the end of the month cut. My boss is the supervisor of the region and we form a team of 5 accountants. All of us need to fulfill a quota of indexed orders to keep our monthly records straight. We also need to deal with supplying our providers with the final product and arranging new provider deals each month to keep the business growing. Each deal comes with an incentive, but if we don't cover the minimum expected expansion, our team drops in the national teams chart, lose benefits, and has difficulty overall climbing up again and regaining status. When my wife's sickness struck our lives, my productivity at work decreased. Nevertheless, I tried my best to keep up with what was expected from me. On the days I left early, I did whatever I could to keep resolving the product orders, but my workflow wasn't the same. At that point, I was the lead accountant of our time. My coworkers were very understanding about what I was going through, but my boss just seemed annoyed each time I had to leave early. This went on for around 3 months. I had been feeling my boss's disdain for my situation. At first, he faked some sympathy and asked about my wife, but when he realized things were going to take a while before everything went back to normal, he started pressuring me. He is an obsessed with work kind of guy, and we used to be one of the top teams in the country regarding our quota and productivity. I heard he was aiming for a raise and a better job position, but since our team decreased its productivity those 2 months, that decision was kept on hold by the board. I regularly had to meet with him and promise him that things were going on all right with my wife, that good news kept coming our way from the doctors. My last month at the company was when the doctors finally scheduled operation date for my wife. Her cancer was sufficiently localized to be removed without any major consequences. Both she and I were thrilled, and we thought of it as a miracle. The operation took place and it ended up being a success. The doctors still recommended we kept going to radiotherapy for a month or 2 before considering cancer cured, just as a measure of precaution. I gave the heads up to my boss and took 3 days of my job shift to take care of my wife. I promised him after this, our numbers would pick up again and our team would be at the top of its productivity again. When I came back to work on Monday after my wife's surgery, my boss asked me to meet him at his office and handed me my resignation. He told me he had been forced to let me go by the higher-ups and that he was sorry about it. I told him the operation went fine and that I could go back to my usual work rhythm in a couple of months, that I just needed the time to make sure my wife was healthy and support her in the meantime. He just reclined his chair and told me that unfortunately it wasn't up to him, that they already had found my replacement and that was scheduled to work with them next week. I needed my paycheck since my wife had been sick, and I was the only one who could produce money to cover all the treatments. We even had to mortgage our house to keep the expenses in check, and this came as a hard pill to take. Since he wasn't willing to change his decision, I told him I wouldn't sign my resignation, so if they wanted me out, they would have to fire me. I said it with such conviction that he didn't even try to convince me. He just said all right, and let me leave to finish my shift. I thought that would deter him from firing me just yet, but I was wrong. At the very end of my shift, they told me I was officially fired and that I wouldn't be working there anymore. A couple of days went by and my anger just kept accumulating and growing. I got to talk to several of my coworkers and they all agreed that the decision was pretty unfair. They told me that they knew from talking to people in other areas that the whole higher-ups forcing him to do that was a lie, and that he was desperate to get rid of me since my production decreased. The following week I thought of a plan. I would log into the system from my home using my key and track my performance to fill a claim with the board and see if I could get my job back. I managed to log in. Luckily, they didn't change my password or erase my account. When I was inside the system, I noticed my replacement had already started working. There was something pretty weird I saw between the orders. I noticed there were a bunch of orders that didn't specify which chemicals were being requested from the providers. I didn't give it much thought and just focused on filing my claim with all my records. I was desperate and needed a way to keep receiving an income to take care of my wife. The next day, I went to the central building of the company. I took my records with me along with a formal complaint, hoping to get a meeting. A secretary at a desk received me and asked for the details of my meeting. I explained everything to her and she asked me to sit while she made a call. I saw her make the call. It was brief, to say the least. I couldn't hear what she told them, but within 2 minutes she had already hung up. I sat and waited for half an hour until she called me. I got up with hopes of having that meeting, but she immediately told me the higher-ups wouldn't be seeing me since they were very busy. She recommended I contact the company via email explaining my case. I knew by her look that there wasn't the slightest chance anyone would take my claim seriously if I sent that email. I tried to explain to her my situation with my wife and how badly I needed the money, so I asked if the company didn't provide any financing plan for medical expenses. She explained to me that sadly, since I wasn't an employee anymore, I couldn't be eligible for any of those benefits. I nodded and left the building devastated. When I got home, that feeling of despair began turning into anger. In the end, I found myself creating a GoFundMe page to cover my wife's treatment. Luckily, a lot of our friends were willing to donate and help us out, so that way we could cover the medical expenses. But I kept thinking this whole thing was so unfair. I was resentful towards the company and my boss, and each day I would find myself thinking if there were only a way to get back at them. I discussed this with an ex-coworker that was a close friend of mine, and he thought the same way as I did. Then, while having some drinks at my house, I asked him about the unmarked orders that were being filled in the system. His look became serious and he told me our ex-boss was doing some shady things. My heart rushed and I asked him to explain everything. He told me that our boss was rushing everything to fill the monthly quota and top the rank of the best teams since he wants that promotion and get a chance to sit on the board of directors. Since regular suppliers couldn't meet the needs for the required ingredients and chemicals for the product, he began reaching out to outsource suppliers. He told me the supplies he was asking them to order weren't a regular ingredient for the formula. It was something else that when it was mixed with just the 10th part of the usual portion of sugar, it ended up having the same flavor. I asked him to give me the name of this sweetener and he told me he just couldn't remember at the moment. I let the topic go, but I made sure to remember and ask him about it when he went to work. The next day, early in the morning, I texted my coworker to ask him about the shady ingredient my ex-boss was mixing with the product. He went and checked and told me most of the box's labels were ripped off, but he managed to read a name in one of them. The label read sodium cyclamate. I thanked him and began my research. I was very intrigued as to why they would go so far as to rip off the label from the boxes. When I began investigating, I understood the reason. Sodium cyclamate is a banned sweetener in several countries. It seemed like some tests in the 80s and 90s related the use of the sweetener with the formation of cancerous cells in the body. I was shocked to know that my boss would go so far as to use a seemingly carcinogenic agent to pump up his department quota. After all I went through, I couldn't allow such a thing to go unnoticed by the consumers. I began recollecting data and taking notes on who were these providers sending the sweetener to the company. Since I was still on the system, I could download and print the files in which the illegal purchase orders were being made. I needed a picture of the boxes and the product though, so I asked my ex-coworker to fetch those for me. I warned him about the dangers of being caught, but he didn't mind and went through with it. I got myself a big folder containing all the proof that my former employer company was using dangerous chemicals to manufacture their product. What was left was to bring the whole issue to light. I got in contact with the television network. I told them the highlights of what was going on, and a few days later they sent a whole reporting team to my house. I asked to remain anonymous as I revealed this information and they agreed. They asked me a few questions and took notes. Then they took copies of each file I had and told me that the next week the news would be brought to light. Next week came and the news was a widespread boom. Every major news outlet in our country was covering it. Our National Department for Food Administration issued a statement, and the company did everything they could to lay all the responsibility on my former boss. They sold him as hard as they could and tried to associate him with the carcinogenic sweetener provider, alleging it was all a plot to fill his own pockets. Part of this was true, but as the investigations were further, they discovered that several of the company's plants were using the same dangerous sweetener. Other order placement teams around the country were doing the same thing, and it all seemed to signal that the higher-ups in the board of directors knew that this was happening. In the end, trials began, and each one of the people involved was forced to declare in front of a jury. When my ex-boss's trial took place, I was there. I saw him deep in the eyes as a way to let him know that I was the cause for all of this. I don't know if he realized it, but I bet he did. He ended up paying a huge fine and was sentenced to a year of house arrest. Some members of the board of directors suffered similar sentences. The company was forced to fire the whole board, and they're still struggling to rebrand themselves and make people forget. But they are having a rough time doing so. Now, here is the end of our first story. I hope you guys are enjoying my content. And in my opinion, the Aholes are the real monster because they are playing with so many innocent lives. And I am happy OP exposed their shady work. Also, OP is a true gentleman for taking care of his sick wife, which is rare nowadays. Guys, I want to know your opinion about this story in the comments section. So before leaving, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more awesome stories.
Now, moving to our final story, which is a quick but satisfying revenge story about how OP's grandfather saved OP's life and sacrificed his own to make sure OP must be safe in the future. Now story. I grew up dealing with a lot of mental health issues, as my mother is a drug addict and my father liked to ignore my existence as I'm the result of a one-night stand while he was married. So needless to say, his wife hated me and their children treated me as well. The only good people I had in my life were my grandma and grandpa on my father's side. I loved them and spent a lot of time at my grandpa's business. Now at 14, everything went further down the hill. I won't go into details, but my mother almost passed away and I met a man, let's name him Goat. He looked like one. Long story short, Goat was 25 at the beginning and emotionally, physically, and sexually abused me. While I was in the present, I loved him and it was okay. He pushed me away from my grandparents and isolated me for 2 years until a friend helped me get out of it. During this next year, the Goat stalked me, threatened me, and had me terrified. I was afraid of going to the police as I didn't want to bring harsh light to my grandpa's business, and because I was afraid. I was staying at my friend's house for a while during this time, as my panic attacks and what I now know as PTSD was horrible and I hated to be alone. During this time, my grandmother passed away, one of the only lights in my life left. So I became worse. I began drinking and going to parties and trying to forget my life. Right before my 18th birthday, Goat made a real-life appearance again. On my way back from a big party, he jumped me, beat me black and blue, and almost killed me. I was found and taken to the hospital where they began treating me, and as I was underage, they asked me to call an adult in my life that they could talk to. I tried to call my father, but he didn't pick up. Knowing my mother wasn't going to help, I had to call my grandfather. He was at the hospital in lightning speed, and for the first time in my life, I watched this man that had built his empire break down. Even at my grandma's funeral, he didn't cry. I spent 2 months in hospital, with police questioning me and my grandpa by my side every day. During this time, he met my friend who helped me out of it all at the beginning and became very close to him. My grandfather helped me get on my feet for a whole year, until one day he had a large family gathering and socialized the whole time, taking me with him. That night I will never forget. We went to get ice cream and then he just hugged me for a very long time, holding me tight and reassuring me everything would be okay. The next day, my grandpa exacted his revenge. Now, my grandpa was the owner of a well-off law firm that also had private detectives in a smaller office in his building. He tracked down the Goat and went about his revenge. My grandpa shot the Goat 3 times in the stomach and once in the chest. Goat passed away in the hospital later that day while my grandpa was taken in and soon put in jail for manslaughter, which he pleaded guilty. I never got the chance to visit my grandpa in jail as he passed away soon after in jail from complications. 1 week after my grandpa's death, I got a call from his solicitor, and he asked me to go in. I was met with a lengthy letter from my grandpa, which was nothing but loving and showed that he had found out he had terminal lung cancer and wouldn't live much longer. But he couldn't happily leave me alone in this world without Goat being gone too. My grandpa left almost everything to me. At 20, I would inherit the law firm and could do as I pleased with it, and I inherited 95% of his savings, the house he lived in with grandma, and his other assets. In case anyone is interested, I turned 21 last week. I'm currently working at the law firm, and my grandpa's secretary has taken over the important things in the building and makes most of the decisions. I spent half the money I was given in locked savings funds for all of the younger family members to go to college when it's time. I cut all contact off with my father, who tried to steal money from me during the death arrangements of Grandpa. My friend mentioned earlier in the story is now my fiance, and we are getting married next summer. I'm still suffering from PTSD and depression, but it's getting better every day. I'm in therapy for my PTSD treatment. I got a tattoo for my grandpa and grandma on my back of 2 lions protecting a cub. I also opened up a safe house for anyone going through abuse of any kind. No matter the race, gender, or age, I'm trying to help anyone I can in that situation. Besides what I've put away for later in life, I'm also thinking of opening up the bakery I always wanted and employing the people that need the job and help the most. But I'm unsure at the moment about that. My grandpa and grandma were a godsend, and to this day I miss them greatly, but I know I couldn't have changed the stubborn old man's mind even if I tried. Now, here is the end of our today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Guys, let know what's your opinion about OP's loving and caring godparents in the comments section, and I would love to read your comments. So before leaving, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more awesome stories.